Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the online panel. I just want to double check because I think, yes, we are on. Yes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting on one-man rule attack in democracy in Turkey and how to build solidarity. My name is Oktay, and I'm honored to be chairing this crucial discussion today. I am a member of SPORT, which stands for Solidarity with the People of Turkey. SPORT is a campaign group which was formed in 2013 following the Gezi Park uprising, where members of the British trade union movement have visited Gezi Park, and on their return, it was an agreed action that we form a solidarity campaign to support the fight for democracy in Turkey. And tonight, we come together to address the alarming situation in Turkey, where democracy and fundamental freedoms are under unprecedented attack. Since 2002, President Erdogan's government has systematically dismantled democratic institutions to consolidate his power. Recently, this crackdown has intensified with the imprisonment of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, which shows the level of suppression of opposition voices. The government has tightened its control over the judiciary, media, security forces, and military, while peaceful protests are met with the violent police crackdown, resulting in thousands of people being arrested. Among those targeted are hundreds of students from universities such as ODTU who are being arrested for their involvement in demonstration. Despite the immense attacks and risks, millions of people in Turkey are continuing to stand up against Erdogan and his regime. Their courage demands solidarity. We are here today to discuss how we can build that solidarity and support the brave people of Turkey. I am grateful that we have an inspiring lineup of speakers who are made up of politicians, journalists, as well as trade unionists, who will bring their direct perspective and expertise to this critical issue. So before further ado, I am going to introduce my first speaker. So my first speaker is someone who's had experience of visiting Turkey and following some trials. So I am going to invite Wheatley, who is from the public sector union Unison. And I want to introduce her to talk about how building international solidarity is important for the trade, why building international solidarity is important for the British trade union movement, and how we can support the workers and activists facing persecution in Turkey. Liz.
Thank you very much, Oktay, for introducing me. And I am, first of all, going to have to apologise. You might notice I'm sitting outside the building. I've managed to double book myself for tonight, but I really wanted to attend the meeting, but I will have to leave part way through it. So apologies for that. But it's such an important issue, and I think it's really matters, therefore, that we are talking about it and discussing it, because, of course, as already mentioned, the recent arrest and detention of the Mayor of Istanbul really represents a significant escalation in the crackdown of opposition voices in Turkey. You know, it was a really highly politicised act and undermining democracy and the will of the people. But actually, it's far from unique as well. You know, but an attack against one of Turkey's most prominent opposition figures, and only a few days before the CHP were due to select a presidential candidate, is actually one of the most brazen acts as well. And it really highlights the political control that one-man rule exerts over society, actually over the judiciary. In the same way as revoking his 35-year-old diploma highlights the control that Erdogan holds over higher education, all aspects of society. I mean, we've seen at least 10 elected mayors replaced by government trustees since the elections last year. And it's not only an affront to democracy, but also to public services, to the communities who use them, and to the public service workers who provide them. So, of course, what's been really fantastic, though, is that Turkey's now been seeing protests the country hasn't seen since Gezi Park. And progressive trade unions, particularly those affiliated to DISC and KESK, are at the forefront of those protests as well. But the response of the state has been shocking. You know, they've been placing the executive of Egetim Sen under house arrest for organising a work stoppage in universities, for example. And the trade unions have been consistent in their call for democracy because, of course, they know it's a prerequisite for workers' rights. So these protests obviously are about the detention of the Istanbul mayor and many others, and the denial of the rights of people to choose their own elected leaders. But they're also about the rapid erosion of human rights and workers' rights, the rule of law and democracy that has taken place really over the last decade or so, the last 12 years. They're about women's rights. They're about inequality of income. They're about public services, and they're about a political and economic system that benefits the rich and those close to the regime. And of course, you know, the government, as we know, is resorting to its usual tactics of suppressing any form of opposition. Over 2,000 people have been detained, most for participating in protests, and there's been a crackdown against Turkey's diminishing independent media and a shutdown of the internet. But actually, despite that, the protests have been continuing. Now, for Unison, Turkey has been an international priority really for about a decade in response to the attacks on democracy and rights that we saw, particularly in the southeast, and of course, the terrorist attack on the trade union rally for peace in Ankara, in which over 100 mostly trade unionists were killed. And so since then, we've been supporting the call of trade unionists who have bravely taken a stand against the erosion of democracy and of workers' rights. And we've consistently, obviously, made demands on our government as well. But the trade union movement has experienced firsthand the politicisation and abuse of the judiciary that's taken place during and since the state of emergency. As mentioned, I visited the heavy penal court in Ankara to observe the trial of 8 leading members of the health union SES who have been accused of leadership and membership of an armed terrorist organisation for their legitimate trade union activities. And you know, it was really shocking to see firsthand how the testimony of a discredited secret witness who, you know, involved in plea bargaining could actually send a trade unionist to jail, despite clear evidence that they couldn't have possibly have been guilty. And it's a trial that we continue to observe and monitor. And in fact, we're sending a member of our presidential team over shortly as part of the international pressure and solidarity to those trade unionists. But of course, it's far from the only attack on trade unionists. And in recent months, we've also been responding to the arrest and detention of the President member, again for alleged terrorism offences, and for you know, officers of KESK, other unions who were also detained in November. And these are just the tip of the iceberg, really, because of course they're the people who are, you know, the leaders, the senior officials in trade unions. There'll be many, many more trade unionists who have been detained simply for doing what we do every day as union activists, of fighting for rights for our members, of trying to organise for a better society, for a fairer world, and defending workers' rights. So I think when we talk about building solidarity, what we can do here, obviously we can't all go over and observe trials. I think that it's important that trade unionists do that and have a visible presence of solidarity where possible, but we can't all do that. But what we can do is keep campaigning for solidarity, for justice for those detained in Turkey. We can invite speakers from Spot to our trade union meetings. We can join the many meetings like this and the protests like last Saturday's that are organised by our comrades in Spot. And because that it matters for our colleagues in Turkey, whether they're in prison or on strike or protesting, knowing that they're supported by trade unionists around the world makes a huge difference to them. Erdogan might think that you know, global turmoil elsewhere gives him a license to act as he pleases, but we need to show that our attention also remains on Turkey. And we know that international solidarity can work, as we've seen in the case of some trade unions. So doing things like that really does matter. As I say, invite Spot to your union meetings, talk about Turkey and work, read up about it, find out what's happening. If you're not familiar, have a look on Spot's website and talk to your workmates about it. See if you can get motions through your union branch and sent to different parts of the union to make sure that the issue is raised. Because, as I said, every single act that we do here matters to our comrades over in Turkey. So thank you very much for the chance to be part of this meeting, and good luck with the rest of it.
Lindsey, thank you for that wonderful contribution. And you have rightly mentioned points about why the trade union movement here in the UK is supporting the struggle in Turkey, and why international solidarity is important. And you have rightly mentioned some of the key issues in Turkey: the one-man rule, the crackdown on democracy, the number of arrests, and so on. And also, I think your presence in taking part on some of the trials in Turkey, I know, makes a huge difference. And just being there, being observant, and also reporting back here to workers in the UK is important. And you've also mentioned the role of sport and why sport is an important tool for the British trade union movement in order to build that solidarity. So thank you for that fantastic contribution. So I'm not sure what's your arrangements for the rest of the day, but do stay along if you can, and also do feel free to leave when you have to go and speak at the meeting that you're currently in. Yeah. So thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think that definitely got us into a fantastic start. Now, it's worth mentioning that normally in these meetings, we do have a tradition of starting with our comrades in Turkey so that we can get like an overview and insight of all of the developments. But due to Liz's commitments today, we had to kind of start with Liz. And what a fantastic way to open the meeting. So thank you, Liz, again. So, and I'm now going to basically continue with the tradition, and I'm going to try and invite some of our comrades in Turkey to give us an insight of the developments in Turkey. So the next speaker I'm going to invite is Sevda Karaca. She is an MP for the Labour Party of Turkey, and as a member of the Labour Party of Turkey, Sevda has been directly involved with the right for workers and democracy in Turkey. And in a minute, I'm going to invite her to share her insight on the challenges faced by the progressive forces in Turkey and how international solidarity can make a difference. Over to you, Sevda. Sevda, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Now it's okay now.
This is fine. Thank you, Sevda.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening. And firstly, I would like to thank Spot for organizing this meeting and helping to form a bridge between the workers and unions in Turkey and Britain. I would like to start my speech by giving some context to what we have seen over the last few months before talking about how we built the movement in Turkey and Britain. As you will know, on 19 March in Turkey, we woke up to the news that President Erdogan's closest rival, Ekrem İmamoğlu, was detained. Just the previous day, İmamoğlu's university diploma obtained 35 years ago was revoked and essentially barring him from running in the elections, even though government officials claimed that arrest was related to corruptions. The decision was clearly political. This was not only an attack on İmamoğlu. We know that it's an attack on people's right to vote and people's right to be elected also. Even before this, the heads of elected municipalities were already labeled as members or supporters of a terrorist organization, and trustees were appointed to many municipalities in Turkey. Many Kurdish politicians were already arrested and have been kept in prison for years on baseless charges. And there were already widespread unrest and also widespread dissatisfaction across all segments of society because of the government's economic program, which emptied people's pockets. Workers in Turkey were already battling against wage cuts and working conditions. Erdogan's economic policies have been condemning workers to extreme poverty and dreadful working conditions, and worker struggles were already growing across all the country. One of the most dynamic struggles of this country was the textile workers' fight in Gaziantep. Gaziantep is where I'm elected from as a member of parliament, 20,000 workers fought through February for wages above the hunger threshold. At the time, also the union president leading the struggle, his name is Mehmet Türkmen, was unlawfully arrested in that struggle. At the same time, in Turkey, young people have been subject to a persecution with a black feature and were already showing pockets of resistance. At the same time, in Turkey, the cybersecurity law was passed, which means criticizing the government's policies, any publication or journalist can be labeled as a spy and will be punished. In effect, there is now in Turkey an open censorship law. Every day we see that reports of journalists being detained from TV stations or newspapers, and we said that the operation against İmamoğlu and the people has brought all these movements together on the same street. However, as the Labour Party of Turkey, we believe that coming together is not enough, and a deep-rooted unity is essential today. We all agree that for a long time, Erdogan has been trying to establish a fascist regime in Turkey. The attacks against the mainstream opposition party, CHP, is part of Erdogan's plans also. But more importantly, the underlying goal is build an economic foundation that further exploits the workers and also shift more wealth towards capitalists. The only force capable of opposing this is the united struggle of workers. We believe that. It's not a surprise that the government is taking measures to prevent disunity, including banning protests, issuing punishments orders to the judiciary, and even granting torture at the police stations. Passive actions like boycotts have been targeted now by pro-government media outlets in TV channels. Even though we support boycotts as Labour Party, we say that a powerful alternative to this general strike, where workers actively use their power from production line to bring life to standstill. This is seen as the most effective way now to respond to the current way of governance. For us, it's important to see calls of masses to the streets and see millions gather at the Saraçhane and Maltepe. Last week, there were 2 million people at Maltepe, for example. However, without disrupting the wealth of capital, we won't see true change. And that is why we are calling for general resistance with a general strike in Turkey. I would like to say that as a result of Erdogan Şimşek economic program, which relies on cheap labor, we have seen strikes and protests at a local level in Turkey. Recently, despite bans on strikes by presidential orders, workers in foreign-owned metal factories have continued their strikes. Similarly, workers in Gaziantep have participated in protests despite bans by the governor, indicating a growing conflict between labor and capital. But there are many obstacles on workers. Workers in Turkey need to develop their organization, need to establish deep-rooted unions at each workplace, and also they need to overcome union bureaucracy in Turkey. Our party sees this, and our campaign for union rights and freedoms has highlighted the urgency of this need. It aims to help workers to see the connection between their economic demands and democratic rights, addressing issues from strike bans to barriers to collective bargaining rights, arbitrary dismissals, and also the disregard of elected representatives. Another point I would like to highlight is about the role of Turkey in Syria also. Erdogan wants to be the main actor in the new phase of Syrian conflict. He claimed to solve one of the Turkey's and the region's most significant problems, the Kurdish issue. He also wants to tame the Kurdish movement, the country's most dynamic opposition force. But he's ignoring the democratic demands of Kurdish people. He's trying to use the country's need for peace to his advantage by manipulating constitutional changes to maintain his power. We know that he's trying to suppress forces like ours, which seek a democratic and popular solution to the Kurdish issue. In summary, we say that Turkey is marching towards fascism under Erdogan's rule. People have no right to vote or be elected. They have no right to organize or oppose. They have no right to protest. There is no freedom of expression or press. There is no right to unionize. Erdogan sees all vital rights as a threat to his power and is trying to eliminate all these. Whether it is the constitution or it's Syria or İmamoğlu, all these political crises are nothing but attempts by the AKP to establish and solidify the state regime it desires. Erdogan's threats, which appeared as calls last autumn under the pretext of the international front, had a clear target for him. The government seeking to profit from developments in Syria needs a dominance both domestically and also in the Middle East. Similarly, in Turkey, the bosses want a share in Syria. Therefore, what we refer to as political crisis in Turkey cannot be considered independent of the economy. We saw all the crises like that, and AKP government and Erdogan are often discusses in the world public opinion in terms of their religious or its reactionary, conservative, and autocratic character. But in reality, the AKP government is an explicit capitalist regime. So everything it does is for the benefit of domestic or international capitalist interests in the country and the region also. The AKP government wants to proceed with an aggressive growth model. This is a model based on accumulating capital through cheap credit and also cheap labor. It's also a model based on counting resources in neighboring countries in the region. It's also a model of plundering the country's all wealth as much as possible. Those who reject this are being repressed with force. Law has become a tool to implement this model. I would like to say that Turkey is experiencing the same problems that the world's capital aggressions and also the autocratic regimes representing these aggressions have inflicted on the people of different countries. So, yes, Turkey is experiencing it more intensely due to the dynamics of the region. But there's one thing I always say at such international meetings, I say it again, we do not ask the international community to condemn undemocratic practices, denounce Erdogan, and stop him. No, this approach is really wrong, as if everything were fine in the international arena, for example, in the UK, and now they need to extend a helping hand to the people of Turkey. We know that in the UK, workers and also migrants, women, and youth are also under massive capitalist attack. We are dealing with the same problems in Turkey, but in a different form. What we ask from the international community is more struggle, more solidarity, more unity, and also more organization. As the Labour Party of Turkey, we believe that the most essential thing to stop our country and also the world from heading towards fascism is the unification of the struggles of large segments of society who are experiencing anger, unrest, and also poverty, and also hunger, and also injustice. What will protect our country and also the people of the world from fascism is the united struggle of the masses. International solidarity and international struggle are not just beautiful slogans from the past. They are the most fundamental forces that will protect the world's people from capitalist aggression. We'll believe that. And our call is to support the united struggle in our countries, create networks that will strengthen the international struggle, and also recognize that our problems and our enemies are common. So we can fight together. We can build the workers' struggle against capitalist aggressions. All the capitalists of the world, we see that they are uniting and they increase their aggression also. To stop this aggression, there is only one slogan, a historic slogan: workers and laborers of the world unite. We believe that workers and laborers of the world will unite. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sevda. Thank you. I mean, there was so many good points. I really didn't want to cut you off, and I think you've touched on some really, really good points. And I think some of the good points you've made, and I think it's important for our viewers in the UK to know. For example, you talked about obviously the importance of building bridges between the British workers and the Turkish workers, which through further struggle. You've talked about some of the challenges of the working masses in Turkey were having in terms of wages, working conditions, where examples of this were seen in places like Antep, and especially with the struggle that Mehmet Türkmen and Birteksen has demonstrated. And you talked about how all of these struggles almost unified with the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu and basically brought the masses together. And I think that's an important point to make. I think it's important to highlight that the 2 million people that we've seen on the streets of Istanbul last week are there because of their worker identity, their Kurdish identity, their Alevi identity, their secular identity, women identity, LGBT identity. I think that's an important point to make. And I think another one, which will be very, very important for our British speakers and British viewers. Imagine having a cybersecurity law which basically censors you from saying things against the government. I mean, it's unseen, unheard of. So, and these are the sort of things that our friends in Turkey are kind of dealing with. And again, one final point that you mentioned how Turkey is becoming the land of exploitation, free, so especially cheap labor. And I think last week when we had the online rally, our comrades from Europe said that how Europe sees Turkey as the new Bangladesh or the China of Europe, where workers are being exploited for cheap labor. So thank you for that fantastic contribution. And we're going to deep straight down into the next speaker from Turkey. I'm going to ask Yuksel Taskin, who is an MP from the Republican People Party, CHP. Now, as a representative of the main opposition party, CHP, Yuksel will provide us with a valuable perspective on the political struggle within Turkey, the importance of electrical resistance, and how to challenge Erdogan Erdogan will to hold on to power. Over to you, Yuksel.
Hi everyone. I am very grateful to Spot for their support for Gezi Park and this ongoing very critical struggle we have in Turkey right now. Of course, this can be referred as a typical case, state versus the people. They have the state apparatus, they have the force, but they fail to convince the people for their ongoing operation. In terms of rights, yes, there is suppression. In terms of basic freedoms, yes, there is suppression, but there is will not to accept and to resist. And this is not also something new. Sometimes, journalists from Europe, from the United States of America, they came and asked questions, and they got surprised when they see the level of opposition in Turkey. And I am surprised because, for many years, we are having very critical struggles. And sometimes we make some victories, sometimes we experience defeats, setbacks. But the point is that we never give up. We never give up. And we will never give up until we, get rid of this one-man despotism in Turkey. And let me begin with a very, very clear point. How things are very global. To make it clear that how things are very global, Trump definitely supported Erdogan, and after that support he started this operation. And so many Twitter accounts belonging to oppositional figures were cancelled by Twitter. Elon Musk. This was also some sort of blow to our opposition. So look what's going on here. People like Trump, they like each other. Putin, Modi, Netanyahu, Erdogan, Orban, these guys like each other because they represent a similar worldview, and we represent, of course, an alternative to that. So what we are doing in Turkey is part of a global struggle, actually. And as Sevda Karaca mentions, there is, of course, significant potential risk for rising fascism. Look at 1930s and what we are having in for example, in Germany. So this is struggle. This sort of struggles, when we make some gains, of course, it's something very good for you, for our friends there in Spot. This operation, after the consent of Trump, started on March 18th. Suddenly, Ekrem İmamoğlu's diploma was revoked. What does this mean? Erdogan doesn't want his most powerful rival to run for coming next presidential elections. This is a serious blow to the people's right to elect, of course. Elections were never fair and free in Turkey, but we were having elections anyway. But this is a very critical blow and unacceptable. For about 150 years, we have some sort of parliament. For about more than 80 years, we have elections, competitive elections, military interventions, again multi-party life, so on and so forth. So we have some sort of tradition and experience. Especially local elections are very, very important. So under Turkish law, so Ekrem İmamoğlu at this moment cannot run for presidential elections. Next day, on March 19th, İmamoğlu and 100 people were detained on charges of so-called charges of corruption. And there is also an alleged accusation, claiming that İmamoğlu has some sort of connections with a terrorist organization. Of course, these are nonsense. Why they try to claim this so-called link with a terrorist organization? Because it can make it possible to appoint a government trustee instead of Ekrem İmamoğlu. Seemingly, this was not realized because of the strong protest of the people. But of course, this is also a risk for the coming days. So you may not like the term competitive authoritarianism. I have some sort of objections, but for the moment, let's use Turkey as an example of competitive authoritarianism. Why it is authoritarian? almost 80% of constitutionally defined political power is held by one man, Erdogan. So is this a republic? So elections are not fair and free. Press is not free. Business is under control. Unionization is very risky and difficult. So we have a typical party state. Despite these, points, we have one of the most resilient and strong oppositions in a competitive authoritarian regime, and this opposition sometimes makes important gains. In 2019, Ekrem İmamoğlu, actually he's a member of my party, Republican People's Party. He won the metropolitan mayorship of Istanbul, largest city actually. And again in 2024, İmamoğlu again was able to defeat Erdogan's candidate. So far, Ekrem İmamoğlu was able to defeat Erdogan for 3 times. And for coming presidential elections, the chances for him to again defeat Erdogan was very, very high. That's why this operation was introduced. Despite these constraints, despite these authoritarian nature of the regime, we still managed to win certain elections. But believe me that we don't think that elections are the only instruments for democracy. We are not, childish at this regard. We believe that there are other instruments, of course, worker struggle. For example, I am a member of an education trade union, Eğitim Sen, and executive board of Eğitim Sen is now under house arrest. Why? Because they showed their solidarity with student demonstrations, which is a constitutional right. And believe me, Article 34 of our constitution gives people the right to protest without a priori permission. We have right to protest peacefully without getting any permission. We don't have to get any permission. So what does this mean? State authorities deliberately actually don't respect and obey their constitution. So more than 2,000 people who are now in prison are not actually legally their detention. Their situation is not actually legally justified, constitutionally justified. This is an important point, maybe to disseminate by different people in different parts of the world. So my party won last local elections in March 2024. And currently we are the strongest party of Turkey with chances of winning the coming presidential elections and general elections as well. And of course, this is not a struggle only my party is carrying out. We have so many comrades. We have so many, supportive groups. Actually, this is a struggle for democratization. This is not a struggle for my party to come to power, actually. So let me make this very clear. And probably you heard that there was a ban on political protests in Turkey right after Ekrem İmamoğlu and his friends were detained. Despite this ban, tens of thousands of people took to the streets, and they actually went to the Saraçhane, which is the symbol of metropolitan. It is this place where Metropolitan City Hall is located. For about 1 week, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people were there in a protest of this shocking operation. People, did their best to actually show that they don't accept. If we are the nation, if we are the people, if we are source of the will, if we are source of the constitution, we don't accept this. So for about 1 week, people, despite there was a political ban, despite there was the high risk of violence, people were there, and there was also a primary election held by my party, and party members and non-members were also permitted to vote in this primary election, and 15.5 million people, more than 15 million people, they voted for Ekrem İmamoğlu's candidacy for coming presidential elections. This is one of the most powerful, surprising civil disobedience acts ever witnessed in my country. And in last Saturday, there were about more than 2 million people who gathered in Maltepe, again in protest of Erdogan's recent unacceptable acts. And right after that, there was a start of a campaign, signature campaign, so that İmamoğlu should be released and he should be able to run for the presidential elections. We target more than 20 million people with this campaign. And we also started certain boycotts. Purpose of these boycotts is to actually show our power against those media outlets who are unwilling to, show us our reality. And we are also protesting certain companies. We believe that they have some sort of direct support for authoritarian measures of the regime. We don't have so much time, but believe me, what if we are able to win in Turkey, this will be a victory of you as well. And so if if Indian people can make a victory against Modi, this is a victory for all. If people of Hungary can make a victory against Orban, this is also a gain. And I will finish with a Twitter statement. An American wrote that, look at Turkey, 2 million people took to the streets. What's going on in the United States of America? We should do the same as well. So this is a typical case of a demonstration effect. When people observe other people are bravely in the streets, and believe me, we are there in the middle of violence. Despite violence, people are very, very decisive. They don't fear of the regime. That's why, believe me, if imagine that there is an election tomorrow, majority of the people will vote in protest of what happened recently. So that's why, despite what enormous power they have, capital, arms, tear gas, whatever they have, when they fail to convince people, the source of all authority in this regime, and as long as there are elections within the system, they are doomed to fail, I believe. Of course, there are so many points, but I don't want to take your time too much. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Yuksel, for that fantastic contribution. And I think some good points, and also some points that I think we should be kind of inspired to. I mean, you talked about how struggle is always there, and again, this was something that Sevda also mentioned, and you've also mentioned it as well, because sometimes watching from the UK, watching from the Europe, you might think that, is this a winnable fight? But quite clearly, the struggle is there, and the will to change and the will to get the one-man regime is quite clearly there. And I think that is fantastic to hear, And you also talked about Trump's support for Erdogan and how he has influenced his decision to speed things up. But also, I think that one of the excellent points you made, how elections are not the only tool of the struggle, and there are other tools such as strikes and the workers' movement, which is fantastic. And also, I am also a member of the National Education Union because I'm a secondary school teacher here in the UK, and Eğitim Sen is our sister organization in Turkey, and I know Louise will talk about this, but we are due to have them speaking at our conference over the Easter holidays in April. So it will be interesting to see what's going on in there. So, but thank you for your contribution, and we salute you for your struggle as well. Okay, so next up, I am going to invite a speaker from the sector of society who has been quite influential in terms of the rallies and the demonstrations in Turkey, and that is the student movement, especially student movement from students from universities who have mobilized and have joined in their thousands around the country. So I want to invite Ilgin, who is a student from the ODTU University. Ilgin is a student activist from ODTU who has taken part in the recent demonstration against the government repression. With hundreds of students arrested, including many of her peers, Ilgin will provide first-hand account of the resistance from Turkey's youth and the importance of supporting student activists. Ilgin, over to you.
Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Spot for inviting me to this panel. I'm Ilgin and I'm a student in Middle East Technical University, METU for short. Actually, I would like to discuss the role of youth in the struggle, how we built this movement, and where this struggle stands from the perspective of youth. Actually, although this entire process seemingly began with the diploma scandal and the detention of one of the most prominent opposition figures, Ekrem İmamoğlu, it quickly evolved into a much larger and much more massive movement, and it was fueled by the accumulated anger of young people toward the authoritarian government policies over the couple of years. And we can easily say that the people who have been long been subjected to censorship, arrests and detentions of leftist socialist groups, economic crisis, and restrictions on spaces where young people could express themselves, and have realized that they had no option left but to resist. From the very first day, when young people tried to march, tried to resist, we were met with police barricades, tear gases, violence, and we witnessed firsthand how state violence was deployed against us. However, solidarity was evident at the moment those barricades were set up, and young people provided each other with homemade remedies against tear gases. They distributed each other masks, and from that moment, we quickly grasped the importance of organized resistance. And with the power of this mass mobilization, a few days later, we issued a call from METU to all universities for an academic boycott. And from that moment on, at METU, we began holding forums at each classes, each department, and we discussed how to organize this process. And the following week, we did not attend any classes or take any exams. And what we as students aimed during this process was to actually halt the present in order to fight for the future we want, and standing against the government that has been made our lives unbearable for years. And during this week, students who have long been subject to decisions made on their behalf establish their own decision mechanisms and becomes the one directing their own lives. And while they were not attending classes, they still gathered within their departments. They to strengthen their solidarity, and organized numerous events where they could discuss their struggle both politically and ideologically. And through this boycott process, we transformed not only the streets but every space we occupied, from classrooms to our departments, into areas of resistance. Unfortunately, during this process, many of our fellow students were detained with torture and arrested. Today, 300 of our friends are still in prison. However, we know this. Every repressive policy implemented by the government is to intimidate us and break the movement. It only proves how much they fear us. And also, I believe we must recognize something crucial. The more we stand together, the more we act in an organized manner, the stronger we sustain this resistance, and the more powerfully we will emerge from this atmosphere of fear. I think while analyzing this process, I also think it is important to evaluate the political climate for Turkey's youth before these events. We were facing a reality in which the government's authoritarian rule was deepening the economic crisis and continuously shifting its burden onto the people, especially young people. And we were becoming increasingly impoverished, struggling to afford our education, and many were forced to both work and study. In fact, many had to drop out of school because they needed to work to survive. And also in universities, we were dealing with administrations run by rectors appointed by the government for years. And as students, we defend the idea that universities should be autonomous and democratic, and serving as centers for free scientific production. However, the government sought to impose its broader authoritarian policies within universities by appointing rectors and turning them into tools for capital interest. Essentially, Turkey's youth were growing poorer, being deprived of a future, and living without access to the most basic rights, such as quality education, quality housing, quality food. And before this recent movement, it could be said that this situation was pushing young people into increasing hopelessness and despair. However, today the picture is entirely different. Although this process is initially started with the arrest of İmamoğlu, it was about something much more deeper. It was about due to all the issues I have mentioned, and young people whose right to live was being systematically taken away finally said enough, and the movement, the resistance took on entirely a new dimension. And these actions and all these boycotts carried out by the youth during this process, I think, have significantly contributed to strengthening the entire social opposition in entire country. And I think through this process, the young people of Turkey demonstrated immense resistance and organization. But I believe the real question is, the real struggle is beginning after, from now on, and it is, I think, how to make this movement more permanent and sustainable. And I believe we should be aware that this resistance will not be possible without the participation of the working class. And as METU students, and we try to expand the call for a general strike and general resistance from everywhere we are in. So I think these are all I'm going to say. Thank you again for inviting me to this meeting.
Thank you, Ilgin, and thank you for the fantastic contribution. But also thank you for giving us an insight of the resistance that you have within the youth in Turkey. And it's important to say that ODTU University was the place where the 1968 youth movement was born, and it was fantastic to see that almost kind of happening again, where the barricades of the police were broken, and it led to a mass movement. So that was very inspiring to see. But again, you've made a fantastic point, and you said that yes, The arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu did spark things, but it was years of anger from the youth, which has kind of led to this, because this was a youth that was worried about his future, not knowing where to go and not knowing what's going to happen next. So it was definitely a movement which kind of came out from that. So that's fantastic. Now I'm going to rush because I know we've tried to keep Lindsey German here, who has been the symbol of the Stop the War movement in the UK. And I know she's got an important meeting to run to from here. So I'm going to invite Lindsey German from the Stop the War movement to talk about how the anti-war movement should stand with those opposing oppression in Turkey. So Lindsey.
Thank you very much, Oktay, and thanks to Spot for organising this meeting. And it's been an absolute privilege to listen to the speakers from Turkey describing their struggles and their campaigns. And I think that, when we talk about what is going on, I feel that I've worked for a long time in the anti-war movement with the Turkish and Kurdish community here in London. And of course, we won't ever forget that the Turkish anti-war movement prevented George Bush from being able to invade Iraq from Turkey. And we're very, very grateful and very, very in solidarity with what you are now facing and what you have faced repeatedly. And again, I know from working with comrades in London how many layers of oppression and repression that you faced over the years, and how many people had to come and live here because of the repression and because of the attacks on the working class movement. So I'm very, very pleased to be here and to send solidarity. The first point I wanted to make is this, that people have quite rightly made the point about the attacks on democracy, the incredible attack of arresting the person who is going to be the main opposition candidate to Erdogan, but also the attacks on the media, the attacks on the students, the name, they talk about the demonstrations as street terrorism because they immediately have to give a kind of, they have to try to discredit and scapegoat anybody who fights back against them. And all of those things are incredibly important. But I think it's also worth remembering that when we talk about attacks on democracy, and there's a number of comrades today have said, of course, voting isn't the most important thing that we do. We're on the demonstrations, we go on strike, we do all these kind of things. But it's also worth remembering that throughout the history of the left and the socialist movement, people have had to fight for the right to demonstrate, the right to join a trade union, the right to vote. All of these things have been part and parcel of our politics now in this country for several hundred years now. And Karl Marx, when he lived in London, demonstrated for the right of working class people to have the vote. If you look at the trade union movement, there were many, many people deported, people put in prison. So this is an issue I don't think we should separate from, if you like, the economic struggles and the other struggles that we have. They are connected, because if you don't have the basic right to express your view and to express opposition to authoritarian regimes, then you don't have the right to do very much. So it's extremely important, whatever we do, that we defend what limited democracy we have in this country, and even more limited what is happening in Turkey. And we have to defend it very, very strongly indeed. And of course, we're in a very, very dangerous time. We have Donald Trump in the White House. And if you look at the whole drift of politics in terms of governments, in terms of leaders of countries, you're seeing a drift to the right. We've seen it with Erdogan for a long time, but he's emboldened by Trump. He's emboldened by the fact that you've got all of these the people like Orban in Hungary, or indeed, as one of the other speakers said, Netanyahu in Israel, who operates in a completely authoritarian, barbaric way. So they get confidence from these people. They get confidence from the people who attack democracy, who attack trade unions, who attack the left, who attack LGBT rights, women's rights, the rights of migrants. These are something that it gives them confidence to do. And I think particularly with Turkey, of course, we know that whatever disagreements there may be with other Western European powers or with the United States or any of the other representatives of Western imperialism, we know that they always will defend what Erdogan is doing. And we've seen this time and time and time again. And you look at the questions why, I'll put forward two questions. I'm here speaking from the anti-war movement. And of course, Turkey is a major member of NATO, is an incredibly important member of NATO, not least because of the strategic importance of where Turkey is geographically. And if you look at the Ukraine war, Turkey plays a very, very big role because of its role in the Black Sea. If you look at Syria, as has been said, Turkey has played a very big role, and of course is continuing to persecute the Kurds in Syria as well as in Turkey itself. In terms of the Middle East as a whole, Turkey plays a very big role, and one of its main roles is that it acts as a representative of NATO and of the Western powers in an area where they are the only country in the Middle East that does so. And therefore, you've got a situation where, as always with these military situations, they are allowed to act with impunity. And we have Keir Starmer, a government which is perhaps the worst Labour government we have ever had. And that's kind of saying something. Anybody who knows the history of the Labour Party will know there's quite a competition for governments that we don't regard as being particularly good. But this is the worst, and it's the most. Starmer is really, he's a human rights lawyer, supposedly. He says nothing about what Erdogan is doing. He's complicit in the genocide in Gaza, where the British allow flights from Cyprus to carry out surveillance on behalf of the Israelis in Gaza. And he's somebody who not only is defending authoritarian repression in those countries, but he's also somebody who in this country is committed to the most reactionary position, which is going to attack working class people in this country and will attack working class people elsewhere. He's calling for a big increase in defense spending. And as you will know, this is happening across Europe. And Trump has said, we're not going to pay for European defense. What is the response of Germany? Germany's going to become the biggest arms spender in Europe very, very soon. Britain at the moment is the biggest. Britain is the sixth biggest arms spender in the world. It's the most important role for Britain because it lost its empire, but it wants to hang on to its international role, its international power. And at the same time, last week, we've seen following attack on pensioners, following an attack on people with children who don't get benefits. We've now seen the attack on the disabled and the sick, which has really shocked people in this country. And we are protesting and demonstrating about it all the time. And our slogan here is welfare, not warfare. And I think it's very important we link these struggles up. It's very important that we have meetings like this and that people are aware of what's going on in Turkey and understand how serious this attack is, because it's in the news for a few days. The demonstrations are in the news in this country for a few days. Then they don't bother. They move on to something else and they don't look at the underlying reasons for it. It's very important we do look at the underlying reasons for it. But it's also very important that we have international connection and international solidarity. Your fight is our fight and our fight is your fight. We are an international movement. We're an international working class. And here in this country, and I'll just conclude with this, we also are facing attacks, repressive attacks on our own right to protest and right to demonstrate. Obviously nothing on the scale of what people are seeing in Turkey. And I don't want to make the direct comparison, but I will make the comparison that everywhere they're clamping down on protest. In France, in Germany, they're clamping down on Palestine protests. In Britain, they're clamping down on Palestine protests and are about to pass a law, if we don't stop them, to stop us demonstrating anywhere near synagogues. And this is the same police force which only last week broke into a Quaker pacifist meeting house to arrest 6 young women who were campaigning over Gaza and climate change. So we know these same things are going on. They know the populations of the world are discontented. They know working people have a terrible deal. They know that the students are angry and are dispossessed and feel they don't have a future. They aren't prepared to deliver anything for any of those groups of people. So they are trying to clamp down on them. So we see that struggle as the same struggle that you're facing in Turkey as well. So just to conclude, solidarity to you all. It's been absolutely a privilege to be here and to speak, and anything that we can do as an anti-war movement to help, we certainly will do our very best to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsey. And I think, again, another fantastic contribution. And I think you've kind of rightly made a good link with the role of Turkey in the Middle East as one of the major members of the NATO, and also kind of possibly clarifying why both the Western countries and European countries have been silent over some of these attacks recently. Yeah, and also I think you've made a good point about how people like Trump or Orban in Hungary almost paved the way for people like Erdogan to continue with their attacks and kind of almost strengthen one another in that sense. But again, you've underlined the importance of solidarity and international solidarity, and I think that's something that we need to build. And I think just a point, and I think one of our viewers have sent a message, and I think it's probably timely to mention it now. It says here that there are ongoing negotiations between UK and Turkey for 40 jets from UK to Erdogan. Now, if this deal is concluded, it will not only mean further support on growing dictatorial regime by the UK government, which supposedly upholds democracy, but also adds on the negative impact on public spending budgets by shifting taxpayers' money to war-profiteering UK companies. You know, it quite clearly demonstrates, well, Erdogan's approach, but more importantly, it kind of gives a very clear idea of what Keir Starmer here prefers. He quite clearly doesn't prefer democracy. He quite clearly doesn't mind the big arm companies making millions or even billions from Turkish government to further attack democratic rights in Turkey. So it kind of clearly demonstrates that. So thank you for that. So we're going to continue with our speakers, but just before I continue, can I just mention that this stream is being live streamed on a number of platforms, and it's fair to say at the moment we have reached about 4,000 views. So I think we've got about 3,500 people live watching us at the moment, but it's definitely reached over 4,000 people. So which is fantastic. So we've got two more speakers, guys, and we've got two fantastic speakers. Next up, I am going to invite Ben Chacko from Morning Star, the editor of Morning Star, who is probably fair to say that has been the voice of the oppressed people here in the UK, as also one of the main alternative media organizations that voices the workers, the migrants, and those of progressive forces. As the editor of the Morning Star, Ben will shed light on how the media coverage and international reporting can amplify the voices of those resisting Erdogan in Turkey. So Ben, over to you.
Thanks so much, Oktay, and amazing but quite intimidating to hear just how many people are watching at the moment on this call. So really well done to Spot for putting on this important meeting. It's been really, really informative listening to all the speakers so far. I understand, obviously, as the editor of the Morning Star, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the media aspect, and that's been mentioned in passing by a couple of the other speakers, that the political crackdown in Turkey has been accompanied by a sharp crackdown on the media and journalists. President Erdogan does not want Turkish people or international audiences to see either the scale of protest over the arrest of Istanbul's mayor, other opposition figures, or the state's brutality in responding to them. Journalists covering the demos have been arrested, beaten, and shot with rubber bullets. The repression has not just applied to Turkish journalists. it's been extended to international journalists, with the BBC's Mark Lowen detained and then deported from Turkey late last month for covering the protests. And Swedish journalist Joakim Meden was arrested on his arrival in Turkey on March the 27th. Apparently is still being held. And the Meden case is particularly ominous as authorities accuse him of being a member of a terrorist organization, citing the familiar links to the Kurdistan Workers' Party that they accuse so many people of, the PKK. And they've cited his alleged participation in a protest in Stockholm, so more than 1,000 miles away from Turkey, in which a puppet of Erdogan was hung by its feet as evidence of his links to terrorism. These accusations raise some significant issues on the importance of solidarity with Turkey's protest movement and independent media, which I'll return to at the end. My own union, the National Union of Journalists, has called for his immediate release, as well as for the release of all journalists arrested since the protests began. So has the European Federation of Journalists and the International Federation of Journalists. Solidarity from the international community of journalists will be key in raising pressure within Turkey for the release of Meden and others. But so far, the British government, which is often keen to lecture other countries on their domestic politics, has remained silent on the wave of repression in Turkey. Arrests are just part of the media crackdown. Turkish media regulator RTUK has threatened to revoke broadcasting licenses from channels covering the protests and has issued penalties to a number of them. SZC TV, Tele1, Halk TV and Now TV have all been issued heavy fines and temporary broadcasting bans. I think the bans go up to 10 days in the case of, I'll probably pronounce this wrong, but Sozki TV was given a 10-day broadcasting ban. Now those bans are being appealed, so they haven't yet come into effect. But targeting entire channels rather than individual journalists raises the stakes for any company considering critical media coverage of the government and will encourage self-censorship. They are part of an effort to permanently change the media landscape, making it less pluralistic and more easily dominated by pro-government propaganda. This effort dovetails with the closure of social media accounts, which was referred to by a previous speaker. Elon Musk's platform X, previously Twitter, shut down multiple opposition accounts since the unrest began. The majority of the suspended accounts were university-associated activist accounts sharing protest information and locations for students to go to, according to one of the protesters told the Politico website last week. So those closures of people's social media accounts were apparently at Turkish authorities' request. And the most common formal explanation given is that the accounts are inciting hatred. Given the Turkish government's relaxed attitude to accusing peaceful critics of being terrorists, we should be skeptical of claims that its domestic opponents are inciting hatred by sharing information about the protests. And of course, it's ironic that X should be doing this, given that when Musk took over Twitter, he pledged to return it to respect for free speech and end what he called the censorship of politically unorthodox opinions. Musk is, of course, and this has been mentioned, part of a far-right government in the United States with an extremely selective approach to what constitutes free speech. Happy to lecture European countries for allegedly repressing religious people's freedom to protest outside abortion clinics, while detaining and deporting students critical of Palestine, and critical of the Israeli invasion of Palestine, and even banning media organizations from the White House press briefings for refusing to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. The role played by X isn't new, and before Elon Musk took it over, it also suppressed accounts on a significant scale for political reasons during upheavals in other countries, including in Venezuela during clashes between the left-wing government and right-wing street fighters in 2018, and in Bolivia during the coup against Evo Morales in 2019. But it does remind us of the huge power of privately owned media companies to determine what news we are exposed to. In Britain, we're probably most familiar with that in the case of Palestine, where Human Rights Watch has accused social media giant Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, of systematic global censorship of Palestinian voices. But it's not restricted to Palestine. And we need to be aware that when we stand up against the censorship of people fighting for their rights abroad, we're also defending our own rights. not just our right to be informed, but our right to free expression. The crackdown in Turkey is partly Erdogan's immediate response to a potential rival for the presidency, but it also forms part of a longer-term project, as other speakers have referred to, in which Turkey is being driven in an ever more authoritarian direction, and its citizens' rights, including to free elections, free media, and free trade unions, are diminished. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the playbook of governments across much of the West, including in Britain, in the face of their collapsing legitimacy, given falling living standards and rising inequality. We see that in the targeting of the Palestine solidarity movement above all in Britain right now, including in the shocking raid on a Quaker meeting house. But it is deployed against any target questioning the British state. Before it was the climate protesters who are in their sights, and next it may well be the trade unions. The British state's authority depends on its ability to carry out its foreign policy without being challenged by ordinary people who might object on moral grounds to complicity in repression, war, or genocide. Indeed, the Palestine movement has probably been the biggest challenge to the moral authority of the British state in many years. That's why the British state believes it has an interest in suppressing critics of Israel, and has done so across universities, within political parties, and increasingly both on the streets and in private meeting rooms and homes. Which takes us back to the charges levelled against the Swedish journalist Joakim Medden. Israel is not the only state which seeks to silence its critics, not just at home, but around the world. Turkey actually has a long history of doing this. Increasingly, it's aided and abetted by Western governments in doing so. Medden is from Sweden, one of 2 Scandinavian countries which joined NATO in the last few years following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. To join NATO, you need unanimous approval from its existing members, and among the conditions Turkey gave for its consent, delaying admission for some time until it was met, was that Sweden and Finland deny access to so-called terrorists on their to their TV channels, by which it meant censor protests against the Turkish state and those called in solidarity with Kurds. I don't believe in NATO, and I don't agree with NATO expansion anyway, but we should be wise to the way that Turkey has manipulated the process to undermine free speech in other countries. It is evidently succeeding in this in Britain as well, with a series of arrests in London in November and December targeting the Kurdish community, again rolling out the old Turkish government line about association with terrorist organisations. So repression in Turkey is closer to home than we might think in Britain. We have a common interest in standing up against it, in telling the stories and platforming the speakers, but Erdogan doesn't want us to. At the Morning Star, we'll continue to do that, and we can only continue to do that because of our ability to work with amazing organisations like Spot and the access that you give us to voices from Turkey itself. So solidarity with the protesters in Turkey, free the activists, free the journalists. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you again. Some fantastic points in Turkey on freedom of speech. You know, I know you didn't mention this, but Turkey ranks 158 on press freedom around the world. And you've definitely, some of the points you made kind of sports that with the deportation of the BBC journalist Mark, as well as the Swedish journalist as well. But quite clearly, and again, I think you made a valid point to how the Turkish politics can actually influence what happens here in the Britain. And you were right, you've rightly mentioned the attacks on the Kurdish center here and the arrest of some of the campaigners over there, which again, I think are really, really important point. But also it is fantastic to hear that the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists, have taken a swift action on demanding the release of journalists in Turkey, both who have been recently arrested, as well as those who have been arrested before. Now, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that the numbers are well over 100 in terms of the journalists who have been imprisoned in Turkey. So I think that struggle definitely needs to move on. And I think it will be good for us as sport to form some partnerships with the NUJ to be part of the movement that we are trying to build. So fantastic. Now, my final speaker is the person who has helped us develop this idea of sport. I feel like she is the symbol of international solidarity in the British trade union movement. You know, it's not just about her words, but it's also through her actions that she have demonstrated that, not just on the issue of Turkey, on the issue of Palestine, on the issue of Cuba, and all the issue of lots of international solidarities and struggles around the world. And I am pleased to have her as a chairperson, as a spokesperson at Sport, and then I'm looking forward to kind of working with her in the future years. So final speaker is going to be Louise Regan, who is a member of the National Education Union and National Executive Member. Louise, over to you.
Thank you so much for that very lovely introduction. And I just want to thank all of our speakers, actually, but particularly our speakers from Turkey who have given us an update about the current situation. And we know that things are really difficult. And we in the trade union movement here in the UK, I think, need to up our game and do much more, actually, to support our comrades in Turkey. The National Education Union has a very long and proud history of standing in solidarity with the people of Turkey, and obviously we will continue to do that. I think watching what has happened recently, the democracy and the fundamental freedoms in Turkey are facing unprecedented assault. You know, I think it was very difficult before, but what we have witnessed over the past few weeks have been quite shocking for lots of us to see and witness. I mean, we know that since coming to power, President Erdogan has systematically dismantled democratic institutions to entrench his rule. And as I say, the NEU has consistently stood in solidarity, particularly with our trade union partner, Egetim Sen. And it was very interesting to hear from partners in Turkey tonight about the situation. And I've had quite a lot of contact with members of Egetim Sen this evening about the current situation. But also with the wider trade union movement. The NEU is very committed to trade union solidarity. So where there are struggles within Turkey, we want to support that. And we have raised those issues not only with our government, but we have also sent members of our union, including myself, over to Turkey to observe trials and make sure we are there to support our trade union colleagues there with the situation. We also, along with other trade unions here in the UK, ensure we try to invite speakers from our trade union partners to our conferences. And we were due to have delegates from Egetim Sen visit us here in the next week, actually, to talk at our national conference in Harrogate. But it is shocking to hear that after the call to stop work last week from Egetim Sen, all executive committee members of Egetim Sen were given a 2-week house arrest sentence. This will mean it is highly unlikely our international guests from Egetim Sen will be able to join us at our annual conference, and our members will not be able to hear their voices. This is an absolute outrageous attack on democracy and trade unionism, and we will be doing all we can to raise that as an issue with our government and ensure that this is challenged. Obviously, people have already talked about this. The imprisonment of the Istanbul mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, is a stark example of the ongoing attacks on democracy. But what has been most empowering, I think, for me, is that despite the immense risks, millions in Turkey continue to resist. Their courage demands our international solidarity. But our government, as has already been said, has remained silent on this. Our Prime Minister has said nothing, but they have prioritized political and economic interests over fundamental rights and justice. And I think that for us here now, this is a moment for action. We have to think about what we can do. It is essential that we hold those in power to account and that we stand with the people of Turkey. We should all be contacting our MPs, challenging the Turkish authorities, and supporting Spot and all the campaigning work that they are doing. We should be encouraging all of our trade union affiliates to join Spot, to affiliate at a local and a national level, and to help to strengthen the fight for democracy and human rights. But we also need to educate our members. Many trade union members are unaware of the situation in Turkey, and we have a job to do to build that understanding about what is happening, to organise and to build a truly international solidarity movement. As was said earlier, and I think this was a really important point that was raised very early on, the workers of the world, when united, will never be defeated. And this is not about us telling people in Turkey what their struggle is. This is about us organising together. We know the situation in the UK is not great. We are workers and we should be organising and building our solidarity movements together. And I think we have to say here, we give a huge commitment to fight with our partners in Turkey, in the trade union movement, to fight for democracy and for freedom. And we will continue that fight and that struggle. The NEU will continue that, but we need to build the trade union movement here and globally to fight for that justice. Solidarity to all.
Thank you, Louise. I feel like you've done the closing for me, but that was fantastic contribution and kind of really demonstrates quite clearly your commitment to international solidarity, and where I can say this as NEU is also my union, and where we stand when it comes to international solidarity and building that in our workplaces, in our branches, and in wherever we are. Yeah, and obviously, we were organizing a massive fringe meeting at the conference where we would have our comrades from ATMSEN talking about their struggles and further discussing the international solidarity. We'll see where that is, but quite clearly it's now looking very unlikely that they'll be with us because of the unjust arrest they have been put under. So now I'm just going to have a look to see if we have any questions. In all honesty, I have, let me give you some figures, which is fantastic. We've had, I think at the moment, we've got about 4,200 people still live streaming and watching this video, this live event. And we've got people watching from Turkey, from England, all over the place. And I think it's fair to say that it's been quite informative for most of our viewers in terms of finding out the development, but also looking at how international solidarity is possible. Now, I don't see any questions. I'm just going to open it up to you guys. If you have any questions, sorry, if you have any comments you want to share or any questions, feel free. Anyone?
I would just say, from NEU's point of view, if our Turkish comrades can't get there in person, we will make sure their voices are heard, whether that is via Zoom or via video message. We are not going to allow ATMSEN to be silenced at our conference. So we will make sure that their voices are heard and that the fight for democracy in Turkey is very loud and very clear at the National Education Union Conference.
Thank you. Thank you. Yuksel, Sevda, Ilgin, Ben, do you want to say anything? No? We're all happy? Yeah, I think we've all kind of said our final words, but it's quite clear that the key to building international solidarity is building struggle wherever we are, I think. And I think Sevda mentioned this, Yuksel mentioned this, Ilgin mentioned this, and we've also mentioned it here from Britain, through Ben, through Louise, through Lindsey. And it's quite clear that by building our struggle, we will be able to build an even stronger international solidarity. And I think that's what we are all going to do. And we're going to make sure that through the work of the sport, we're going to make sure that, all those workers in Britain are aware of the struggles of people of Turkey, and also show solidarity for democracy in Turkey. So thank you very much to everyone who contributed today, and thank you very much to everyone who have been watching us live.
There's something from Yuksel Taskin, I think, huh, hocam?
From where?
Yeah, there was a
Sorry,
simple,
apologies.
very clear point I would like to make. During Gezi protests, young people of Turkey were the heroes and heroines, you know, and despite they were criticized, allegedly being depoliticized, which is not true. They are very political. They are very interested with the political destiny of Turkey, and the most critical moment of the demonstrations came with the support of Istanbul University students. And at a point, university students made a gathering around 15,000 students. So this is a historical point. I have always confidence in them as a university professor, and I believe that they will change the political destiny of Turkey.
Fantastic. What a fantastic contribution to finish off. And just before I end the live stream, guys, for all of our viewers who are in UK, in London, there is another mass demonstration at Trafalgar Square this week on Saturday at 4 o'clock. So, you know, we want to make sure that we show true solidarity. So we're asking all of our brothers and sisters, all of our comrades in United Kingdom to join us at Trafalgar Square, so that we can have an even stronger voice against Erdogan and his oppression. Thank you very much, and take care.